Back in February 2025, PG&E actually filed with FERC to reduce water flows. They wanted to reduce the minimum water flow that went in through this tunnel system that supplied agricultural production. And they wanted to do this to preserve the cold water pool that is in the lake that they need to make sure that the fish stay alive. The fish need cold water. If the water levels get too low, that cold water pool disappears, the fish suffer. So it was all to preserve this cold water pool. The viability of that cold water pool is going to depend on the overall levels of the lake. And so for them to put this out there in February, one would have to assume, okay, they're expecting water levels to get to the point where it would make the fish suffer. It would get rid of the cold water pool. But that's not what happened. It wasn't until August 4th that FERC actually approved anything. And as soon as they did, they didn't warn anybody, they just shut it down. They shut it down to 5 cubic feet per second. According to FERC, their reasoning behind this was because of the Endangered Species Act. It doesn't allow them to choose endangered species over farming and agriculture. But if that was their reasoning, FERC should listen to this video, because a little scientific experiment could tell them whether or not they would have actually put this endangered species of fish at risk. When the water was cut, farmers at the first intake, Potter Valley, were immediately cut off, no warning. Lake Mendocino, which is kind of downriver, saw a slight decrease in water, but they were pretty full. So in some ways, it was a safe cut. They knew that they would cut off the farmers, but that Lake Mendocino was pretty full, would have plenty of water for the residents of the cities that feed off of the system. At the time of the cut, the lake had 35,000 acre feet in it. 35,000 acre feet. That doesn't sound like a whole lot, but for this area, it is actually a significant amount. They could have looked at this from 3 choices. You could have looked at it from the variance mode, which is what they chose, normal irrigation, which is what they cut off, or they could have taken a farmer leaning stance, said screw the fish, if they were truly low on water, and said we're gonna take care of our farmers and not the fish. So under the variance mode, Eel River release is at 25 cubic feet per second with an irrigation diversion of 5 cubic feet per second, which does nothing for the farmers. They need about 50 cubic feet per second. Normally you would see 25 cubic feet per second going out on the Eel River, and irrigation diversion would be around 50 cubic feet per second. If you thought your dynamics were just really bad and you wanted to save the farmers, then you could have cut the Eel River to 5 cubic feet per second and given at least 50 cubic feet per second to the irrigators if you didn't want to disrupt them. So that's your choices. Preserve the farmers, preserve the Eel River, or operate as normal. The question is, was anything necessary at all? Based on calculations, even in the normal irrigation case, Pillsbury wouldn't have run dry, but it would have dropped 2.5 times faster, leaving much less cold water buffer for fish and less margin if a hot spell or wildfire required emergency releases. But there would have been margin there, okay? They would have had margin there. In the wildfire case, if they had to release it and they expelled that margin putting out wildfires this year, then there still would have been enough to preserve enough of the cold fish pool to keep a majority of the fish alive. There's no reason to destroy people's livelihoods at this point in time. In any case, they didn't want to put themselves down to that point. And like I said, that point wouldn't have they could have even done reduced flows, like taking the 50 down to 35. I'm just looking at in the normal scenario of just continuing business as normal. They could have finished out the summer at least and allowed those irrigators to finish growing their crop seasons. If they had to do a reduction, and they worked with the farmers on that reduction, they could have given themselves even more of a buffer for wildlife protection, but they still would have allowed the farmers to irrigate enough of their crops to at least break even instead of lose a bunch of money. And that's why when you look at something like this, you have to question, what was the point of this? Was this intentionally to bankrupt the farmers? Is this intentionally to get rid of the people in the area?